America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker.
And I'm Jamie Bowers, one of the executive producers on the show.
And you can subscribe to the show at Salem Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts from. Today, we are joined by Eric Hovde. Eric is running for U.S. Senate in Wisconsin. Described as a classic entrepreneur, he founded and managed his first business in his 20s and went on to start and build many others. He then expanded to buying troubled community banks and turning them around. Eric has made a career of rolling up his sleeves, getting businesses back on the right track, and building for the future. He hopes to get Wisconsin back on the right track as U.S. Senator. Eric, welcome to Main Street Matters.
It's great being on your show. I hope everybody out there who's listening is having a wonderful day.
Yeah, well, we've been watching your campaign, and I know that you've been an entrepreneur. Sounds like a serial entrepreneur. I wanted to just kind of start out and have you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm a fourth generation Wisconsinite, so I'm a cheesehead, diehard Packer fan. Went to the University of Wisconsin, so I'm a Badger as well. And then I went off and moved to Washington, D.C. My father had the honor of serving President Reagan. And so I had visited D.C. a number of times while I was going through college and moved out there, started working for an investment advisory company that was advising the banking industry and the savings banking industry. And I was young and aggressive enough that thought, we have about, at that point, 18,000 banks, about 12,000 savings and loans. Interstate banking regs were falling. So back prior to that, a bank from Illinois couldn't come into Wisconsin. A bank from Wisconsin couldn't go into Illinois. And those state lines were starting to fall. And I thought, I can go do this myself. So I started my first company, as I said, in my mid-20s. And then that ended up leading me to getting in the investment management business, managing capital for other parties, investing in the financial services industry. And then I bought my first troubled community bank in 1994 and turned that around and did very well on it. Took a lot of risk. Took every dollar I had and rolled it into this troubled bank. And fortunately, it worked out. And that led me to over, the last, I hate to, state kind of how old I am, but over the last, 25, 30 years I bought probably, well over a couple dozen community banks. And the banking business is my main business. But I've been in multiple other businesses. I helped build a technology value-added reseller of technology leasing company. I have a real estate development company for the last 25 years that operates here in Wisconsin that builds apartments, offices, a little bit of everything. So I'm not going to continue on. The point is, I'm your classic entrepreneur. I love business. I love small business. I love seeing the growth of small businesses going from small to medium to bigger business. So, I am your absolute classic entrepreneur.
Well, coming out of the banking industry and owning a bank, we focus on small businesses and advocating for them. The bank failures last year that impacted some of the banks, our community banks have really actually been hurt since Dodd-Frank. What were some of your sort of thoughts on last year's banking failures and how the Biden administration reacted to some of those?
Well, I'm going to take you back because I'm going to talk about the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic Bank, but I also want to go back to the Great Financial Crisis. So if I could start there, and then I'll end where the last banking crisis of last year. So, when you go back to 2005, 2006, 2007, clearly we were in the midst of a housing bubble. In fact, I was writing extensively about it. I used to put out a piece for my investment advisory company, Hovde Financial, to all the bank CEOs in the country. And I was warning about this housing bubble. And by the way, I was meeting with Federal Reserve officials, congressmen, and senators about what was forming and the risks that was going to create. Well, because of bad government policies and Wall Street that abused the system, and you can name the name, obviously, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers failed because of it. Goldman Sachs was packaging junk mortgage, selling them to their clients, but shorting the very stuff they were selling. They were very complicit in it. What happened when the whole system went down? The big giant banks and Wall Street got bailed out. And what did they do? They let hundreds of community banks fail. And Barney Frank admitted later, after they designed Dodd-Frank, they said, well, this seems very favorable to the big banks and not too favorable to the small banks. And he literally had, some could say the gall to say it, or just the honesty to say, look, we don't mind if the banking industry gets very consolidated and there's only a handful of big banks because it's easier for us here in Washington to control them. Well, that tells you the whole mentality, central control of everything. Little does he appreciate and understand that it's small community banks and regional banks that provide the capital to our startup businesses and our small businesses. For a small business to go try to get a small business loan from a Bank of America or Wells Fargo or JP Morgan is a very difficult thing. They do consumer banking or banking for the large businesses. It's our small community banking sector that makes us one of the most vibrant economies in the whole world. So, with Washington, they bail out the big, they let the small collapse. So now let's go to the banking crisis of last year with Silicon Valley and First Republic. Both of those banks broke what I say are two of the cardinal sins in banking. One is investing long or lending long while you borrow short. And what does that mean? People put their deposits in. That's how they fund themselves. And in Silicon Valley's case, they bought all these long-dated mortgage-backed securities when interest rates were very low. And in First Republic's case, made single-family jumbo mortgages when rates were very low. And then rates started to rise, and the value of those securities went way underwater, and their funding costs started to rise. So they wiped out all their capital. Now, if that was a community or smaller regional bank, or even a bank that size that was probably sitting here in Wisconsin, not a bank to the very wealthy in San Francisco, my guess is they would have let those not only just fail like they did, but they wouldn't have bailed out the depositors like they did. Gavin Newsom, who's the governor of California, had his company's business with Silicon Valley. They say he put calls into Janet Yellen to try to get the bailout of depositors. You saw many of the biggest venture capital firms having their deposits there. Again, they got bailed out. If those banks or those banks' depositors weren't major contributors to Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, I highly doubt they would have gotten that same favorable treatment. So the real question will become, when we get another round of bank failures and we start seeing smaller or regional banks or banks not so tied into the Democratic Party or this administration failing, are they going to bail out those depositors? I question that.
Sure. So what drove you to want to run for Senate? I mean, this is, as a serial entrepreneur, you're used to running businesses. You clearly like it. You're passionate about it. what was the spark that made you say, "Hey, I want to run for Senate. I want to get involved in Washington"?
Because what we're doing to ourselves economically is destroying this country, and we're leaving our children and our grandchildren in a far worse position. And we won't get out of this, even at our age. The simple fact, we are entering ourselves or put ourselves into a debt trap. In the last 3.5 years, we've added more debt to our economy and to this government than our first 230 years of our country's history. The interest costs on our debt now is the second largest expenditure after Social Security, above our Defense Department, and is projected over the next 12 to 18 months to go from $1 trillion to $1.6 trillion, eclipsing Social Security. Look, why do we have the inflation that we have experienced? It's very simple. We have ballooned up the debt. We have spent money recklessly, and the Federal Reserve had to step in and monetize that debt. What does that mean? That means they bought the debt being issued by the federal government, and in doing so, they created more money. So the money supply grew by about 39%, the highest rate we've ever seen in our country's history. Well, what is inflation? It's too much money chasing the same amount of goods and services. So there's no surprise that inflation took off. And what has been the result? Real wages in America have gone down over the last 3.5 years. It's hammering our middle class. It's hammering our working class. Or how about our elderly that are on fixed incomes? It's patently wrong and unfair, but we're putting ourselves into this very precarious position where you can't continue to do that. Look, if you're an individual or a business or a smaller government or a third world country, what do? You default. You restructure through the bankruptcy process. Well, unfortunately, we can't do that. We have $34 trillion of debt. If the U.S. government defaulted, would collapse the whole globe into a depression for 1 or 2 generations. So what are they going to do? They're going to continue to print more and more money, devalue the dollar against all real goods, and just lower the income standards for most Americans and making it harder for most businesses to thrive and grow.
We've talked about the debt for so long, I think people have gotten a little immune to hearing the numbers, but to know that it's the number 2 expenditure of the government everyone should be really freaked out about that.
Yeah, sadly, look, I don't mean to depress people, but this is what motivated me to do this. And we really do need people to stand up and say, enough is enough. This is crazy. Because, and again, look what we're doing to our children and grandchildren. I mean, what was the hope of every American generation is to leave the next generation better off? Well, we're not leaving the next generation better off. We're leaving them steeped in massive amounts of debt. So, but, you can just go on with a variety of other issues. I like to say, I feel like the last 3.5 years, every morning I wake up into a bad episode of The Twilight Zone where what is right is wrong and what is wrong is right. And, I don't care if it's our open borders flooding, 10 to 12, 13. They don't even know how much. Most sheriffs on the border will tell you it's far more than what they're even saying. We're losing 100,000 largely young people a year to fentanyl and the opiate crisis. Most of those drugs pour over our southern border. We have housing issues, healthcare, access to healthcare that has become very pronounced in this country. Heck, Denver health system, all the hospitals, when was it, back in February, told all the citizens of Denver, don't go to the emergency rooms. We're overwhelmed because of illegal immigration. Well, what are you going to do if you have a stroke or a broken leg or you're having an allergic reaction? Just lie there in your house, die or suffer? I mean, it's insanity, the policies that this administration has pursued. I don't mean to get overly political, but that is really what propelled me to say, I've been blessed in life. And to, I have certain beliefs to much is given, much is expected. To where a man's heart goes, so goes his treasure. And so, look, I want to focus on trying to restore America for, my kids, grandkids, and everybody else's children. This country is too wonderful. I've been into 100 countries around the world. I have a foundation that we created Hovde homes to rescue children, street children, saving kids out of sex trafficking or even saving kids out of slavery in Ghana. And so I know what the rest of the world looks like. And if this country fails, it's going to be devastating, not just for us, but the whole world. I mean, we are the beacon of hope. We have to restore this country.
Eric, under the Trump administration, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed. I mean, Trump tackled regulation like no administration we've seen in many, many years. We had the best economy we'd seen in half a century. Wages were growing faster than they had in the previous decade. I mean, I think I could go on and on. I probably don't have to tell you any of this. President Biden has touted Bidenomics as being a success, and yet we know from speaking with our small business owners across the country, we also do a national poll of them, that Bidenomics is hurting our small businesses in a very big way. The inflation, just the inflation alone, driven by high energy costs, has disproportionately hurt our small businesses across the country. What are you hearing from residents and small business owners in Wisconsin about how Bidenomics is hurting them?
Well, let me just give you two numbers before I tell you what businesses are saying. Under President Trump, real wages, your wage increase, minus inflation, grew at the fastest pace, 8.2%. Mm-hmm. Under President Biden is declined by 2.7%. That should say everything. As it pertains to small businesses, because, in my commercial office buildings or in my banking, my bank where we deal with so many small businesses, they're all addressing the same issues. Inflation is very difficult for them. Labor. I mean, the labor policies that were put in place and pushed. I mean, to think that Bernie Sanders pushed to pay people more not to work than to work during COVID, and the lingering effects that has had on our labor force has been so wrong. Or how about Joe Biden still letting government employees work remotely from home? Wait, you can be out there at sporting events, you can be packed into bars, you can be packed into planes, but you can't show up to your office to go to work? Are you kidding me? I mean, it's insanity at every single level. Again, it's like what is right is wrong and what is wrong is right with this administration. Everything's back asswards. Every time I talk to small businesses, they're unhappy in large part with this administration. And look, we've got to have our small businesses be strong. If we just move to this big corporatocracy where it's only the giant businesses that can survive because small businesses are just stranglehold. I was with a CEO founder. Actually, he's not CEO anymore. His son is the CEO, but a founder of a company that is the biggest furniture maker in America and one of the biggest in the world. And I mean, it's amazing his story and what he built and what he's given back to his community. And he said to me when we were done talking, he said, I don't think I could have built this company today. I don't think I could deal with all the regulations and difficulty. And I thought after him saying that, here's a guy who had so many different obstacles and always figured a way around them and was able to persevere, saying, look, in today's world, there's just too much regulation, too many things that would have been an obstacle to me. So we need to free the shackles of small businesses, and we've got to deal with our regulatory state. I mean, they did an extensive study, I think it was 11, 12 years ago, on the cost of regulation. There probably has been a new one, but this was 12 years ago that estimated the cost to the economy was somewhere between 1.7 trillion to 2.2 trillion dollars for all the regulation. Now, I don't have a problem with some level of regulation. Nobody has a problem with some level, but to think that that the extent that we have today is just choking businesses.
I think both Elaine and I have heard Bernie Marcus say something similar many times about the Home Depot. When the Home Depot was a small business and he had one or two stores, he says, if I were trying to start that today, I couldn't do it because the cadre of lawyers and consultants you need in order to comply with all the regulations and all of the government red tape has really gotten out of hand. And, we've talked a lot about immigrants coming to America and minorities, kind of growing wealth. And one of the best ways to do that is through owning your own business and starting your own business. But if we make it so difficult to get whatever, permits you need to do X, Y, and Z, it really is hamstringing millions of families from really getting to that American dream and accomplishing that.
100%. And then you have states like California that let the trial attorneys run amok. So, we moved the headquarters of my banking organization out of Irvine, California. We still have a big office there to Salt Lake City. And it was amazing. Even if the employee barely showed up, could show up drunk, all the rest of you terminate him, you'd end up in a lawsuit with him. Everything is just trial attorneys always trying to shake you down. Where, in a market like Utah or Arizona or Idaho where we operate or Florida where we operate, okay, if you terminate a bad employee, once in a blue moon, they may try to sue, but it's dismissed out of hand pretty quickly. So we've also let, litigation in so many of our states just unnecessary. And it's just such a cost, which is what rises and raises the cost in markets like California, where it's become unaffordable and why so many people are moving out or out of New York or New Jersey. We're really seeing an interesting shift. And that's anytime when you get into this discussion with people about, the different political parties today, you can always just point out, well, where are the states that are booming? Where are the states that are doing well? Well, they're largely all red states. It's places like Utah. It's places like Texas. It's places like Florida that, are booming and where people are moving to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say that as a person who's in Florida. So yes, we are booming down here.
Yeah.
You mentioned healthcare. Healthcare is a pretty big line item for small businesses. Obamacare passed, obviously under the Obama administration. It took a system that was broken and broke it even more through complexity and regulations and a one-size-fits-all that has made it very difficult for small businesses to offer health insurance to their employees. In the Inflation Reduction Act, Biden doubled down on the subsidies for folks in the marketplace, which continues to drive up overall healthcare costs. I think I saw an interview that you were in. You said there are two areas that have had the most inflation of any area, and one of them was healthcare. The other one was higher education. We can talk a lot about higher education too, with student loan relief, student loan bailouts. But how do we get to a point where we actually make healthcare affordable and accessible and still have it be quality healthcare? Because right now we've got people walking around with health insurance cards in their pockets and they don't have access. We've got people who are just outside of the subsidies who can't afford it because the subsidies are driving up the overall healthcare costs. How do we get to that point where it's affordable?
Well, you have to bring competition back into the market. And let's face it, that's one of the detrimental things that Obamacare did. It destroyed competition. They were actually trying to ration care. One of the creators of it talked about we're going to have to ration some level of care in America. It has done nothing positive to the cost of healthcare. Since the passing of Obamacare, costs have only accelerated higher, and the access to care has clearly gone down. And I'll use it as an example. I sit here in Madison, Wisconsin. This is my hometown. And we had 3 healthcare providers. The biggest one was the UW Health System. It ended up buying the number 2 biggest one, Meritor. Now, Meritor is still out there as a name, but they basically absorb 90% of their functions. And so we now have really a almost complete monopoly because they control probably 75, 80% of the healthcare. And then there's one other one, SSM Health. But as a result, the healthcare costs in Madison, Wisconsin are as high or higher than what they are on the East Coast or on the West Coast, where everything else is much higher in costs. From parking to your homes to, your food bills, all the rest. So it just shows when you destroy competition, you remove the key element of a free market system to keep and drive costs lower. One of the good things that we did with my bank was we moved to self-insurance. We've been able to keep costs down because we introduced things and tied people's future healthcare costs to how they manage their health. And, this tells you how distorted the healthcare market. Here in Wisconsin, if I go do an MRI at the UW Health System, that could cost me $4,000, $6,000, name it, on your knee, whatever. I could go find that same place in downtown DC, downtown LA, anywhere else where you have more competition. And fortunately now here in Madison, because a couple MRI places opened up, where you can go get that done for $400 or $500. And that's what we need to do. We need to bring competition back into the market. We need to make consumers shoppers of healthcare. We need to provide price transparency. I mean, think when you call a hospital, well, how much is this surgery going to cost? They won't tell you. You have to go call a special number. You get put on a rigmarole. They never want to disclose that. There was a individual here in the state of Wisconsin that started tracking the cost of everything. He got sued. He finally had to shut down because he got sued by all the health systems because they didn't want his website out there telling people what the cost of things were. Now think of how insane that is. So the only way we're going to get control of our healthcare system is if we let our free market system work.
I agree, and there's been a big movement towards direct primary care, which is because doctors' were being bought up by big hospital systems. They didn't want to work for hospital systems, although about 50% of them do now. But as these doctors said, I don't want to work for a hospital system. I don't want to be indebted to the hospital. I want to have a doctor-patient relationship. So they've moved to these models of direct primary care where it's like a gym membership. You pay a monthly fee and all of your direct primary care is included in that fee. And they do telemedicine. And many times depending on state laws, they can actually dispense drugs as well at a much better cost than going through a traditional pharmacy. Those are the types of things that we advocate for, and our small businesses are benefiting from as well, or even medical cost sharing for some of the things. You can't plan your next heart attack, but you can certainly plan your next root canal and shop for that. And when you start shopping for those things, and I tell people all the time, if you shop for braces for your children, you will find varying prices. If you shop for LASIK surgery, you will find varying prices. Wherever you find competition in that area. Dentistry actually is another area, even though we sort of have insurance for dentistry. It's really just for your cleanings. As soon as you have a cavity, watch out. It's expensive. So shop for that too, because you will find so many different prices and people just, they don't know. And so we spend a lot of time educating people about those kinds of options that are out there, and our small businesses. But you're right. I mean, those are the three things that we have to have. We have to have price transparency. We have to have competition, and we have to have choice. Otherwise, we're going to continue drifting towards completely government-run healthcare. And I just don't think Americans really understand how bad that will be for them.
Oh, 100%. Look, they love touting things like the UK health system. Well, guess what? You need your knee replaced. Wait for 2 or 3 years if you're lucky. There's a reason why most wealthy people will travel here to go access places like Mayo or the Cleveland Clinic and these health facilities. But we are heading continuously down this path of socialized medicine. And it is, again, you're just going to ration more and more care. And the cost has not been bent lower. So it's been disastrous. I do have hope, though. If we can shrink the government's role, there's a lot of innovation out there. I don't invest in a lot of other people's funds, but there is a healthcare fund, a venture capital fund that I invested here in Madison. And I served, on their advisory board, looking at all these new innovative companies that can deliver healthcare cheaper, like telemedicine, that can bring drugs cheaper, testing in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 drugs is so expensive. Ways to do that more cost effectively that will, help lower drug prices. So there's a lot of innovation out there. If we just let our American economy, our free market system work and get the government scale back out of it, I think we can solve this problem, but the government is the problem.
Absolutely. I think you're 100% correct. And it's such a big part of the economy that it's kind of like the debt. I mean, this is something we have to figure out if we're going to move forward as a successful country. Eric, tell us how can people, especially people in Wisconsin, find out more about you? Do you have what's your website for your campaign?
Sure. EricHovde.com. Right here, Hovde is Hovde. So Eric with a C, ERIC, EricHovde.com.
Excellent. And I understand that you recently got the endorsement of President Donald Trump.
Yeah, it was quite the surprise. I was at a rally. We had a nice conversation beforehand. Asked, would you like my endorsement? I said, absolutely, Mr. President. So we had a nice conversation. Then I had spoken before him, and then I was sitting in the audience. And the next thing I know, he says, Eric Hovde, where is that handsome devil? And I had to laugh and then said some nice comments about my wife and then stood up and I give you your endorsement. So, appreciative of that. And look, it's very critical we take this country back. We've got to get this country back on the right stead. And, any and all help to do that. I appreciated my race. My father, as I mentioned, had the honor of serving President Reagan. I believe in the broad tent strategy, bringing as many people into our party as possible. So I'm competing against one of the most progressive, liberal, votes with Joe Biden 95.5% of the time, as I said earlier. And I'm going to compete in the minority communities in every part of the state because we've got to take, bring common sense back into our government and take back control of the U.S. Senate.
Well, Eric, we want to wish you luck in your race, and thank you so much for joining us today on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen to Main Street Matters. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday, and we'll be back soon with another new episode.